Hi, this is Willie Hensley. My Inupiat name is Tuzroyluke. I was named for my grandfather, who was a reindeer herder. And I was born in Kotzebue, otherwise known as Tauruk. And I spent most of my early life living in the Little Noatak area. We had three different sod homes in that area. This was in the old world, so to speak, when dog teaming was our mode of travel, and we pretty much made our livelihood, on the land and the sea and the rivers there in the Kotzebue area until I was about 15 when I went off to boarding school. And I'm very pleased to be invited to interview Lily Tuzroyluke. In my opinion, she is a leading light in today's Inupiat literary world, and she's working on a new book. And we want to chat with her about her life and her ideas and her process and what she has coming in the future. And first of all, Lily, would you talk about yourself and allow people to get to know a bit about you? Since I know you have a very interesting background, please let the viewers hear about your life and your ideas.
Hi, Willie. Thank you so much for Alaska Book Week, Alaska Center for the Book, for organizing this. My name is Lily Tuzroyluke, and I am from Point Hope, originally from Point Hope, Alaska, Klukwan, Alaska, and King Colith, British Columbia. I currently live in Anchorage. I have two children and a small terrier, which you might hear in the background because he thinks he's the toughest dog in the world. And I wrote Sivulliq. It was my debut novel, an Inupiat story that takes place in Arctic Alaska during the 1890s, during the commercial whaling, the Yankee whaling. And my next book is going to take place in British Columbia, 1950s. The story is about a residential school.
Wonderful. Um, well, I just completed reading Sivulliq. I'm here outside of Alaska, visiting down south here, but I was uh, around when people from that generation were still around, and so that's how ancient I am. And so, your story resonated with me. Um, and I know that Tiqirak or Point Hope is really an ancient community. And it was a powerful community because there was protein, and it was one of the largest communities in Western and Northern Alaska, from my understanding. And what I would like to know is how did your background affect your life and what you're doing now? And how did you decide to begin to write?
Yes, I've always loved storytelling, and I started in junior high actually, with some poetry, and one of my teachers encouraged me to develop that. And I going into college, I actually wanted to work for tribal government. That was what I wanted to do, and which I did. I worked for the tribe in Skagway, and then eventually to my tribe in Point Hope, the native village of Point Hope, which I loved and I miss. And until my son was diagnosed with autism at 3.
Hmm.
And so by the time he was 5 years old, or maybe 7, I knew that he would need more help.
Hmm.
And it was a transition. I moved both me and my son from Point Hope to Anchorage, and it was a lot at the time, uh, dealing with his diagnosis and also my career, which I had worked
Yes.
up until that point. And I thought, well, if I'm going to write, then now is the time. Now is the time. And
Okay.
I really credit my son for, I had to commit to this
Yes.
dream. And he's doing really well. He's at the Anchorage School District, and he's gotten a wealth of services here in
Yes.
Anchorage. And I sat down, I wrote Sivulliq. I like to say that the concept started 20 years ago, but
Yes.
mm, Sivulliq was really a commitment, sitting down at the computer for about 2 years. Um,
Yes.
and uh,
Uh,
the inspiration came from so many different sources, mainly the people of Point Hope, the whalers and the hunters and elders, um, traditional gatherers. And that was just working at the tribe was a great opportunity to listen to traditional stories. Many of them are inspired, and Sivulliq.
yes. Um, I was you must have done a lot of research, because I know that the whaling industry was a huge global industry, really.
Yes, yeah.
And when I was teaching at the university for 10 years, I had the opportunity to do some research about the whaling industry. And it was just, I could not believe that in the northern part of Europe, uh, in the Svalbard area, there was a little island that had 20,000 workers. Can you imagine that, processing whale oil to light up and grease the emerging industrial world? And so, in a sense, Northern Alaska, Point Hope in particular, and those communities there were, sort of a part of that process. And I think some of that kind of came through in your book. And how did you go about gathering that kind of data? That is the interaction on the ships, right, between the various workers and the captain, and it's a different world that most of us can't hardly comprehend.
Yes, yes, it was an incredible amount of research. Even for the Inupiat traditional history, that was a lot of research, but which I had some knowledge of. But for the Yankee whalers, I knew nothing. I have never been to New Bedford or Nantucket. I've never been on a ship.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I was starting from zero with that part of the story. But I find with in writing, including this book now, um, that once I've done the work, once I've put in the research, and I have these characters, their backstory, and uh, there comes a point after once I've done enough research that I can start thinking, well, what are they thinking in this? What is their motivation in this part of the story? And gathering that I gathered that information for a number of sources. I watched a lot of movies and TV shows, and I found
Mhm.
pictures of tiny models of miniature whaling ships,
Mhm.
because that's some
Mhm.
people do really vast miniature models, and then historical accounts, and some of these new research studies by people of color, which
Yes.
I really leaned upon, because what we've been taught about uh, commercial whaling, Yankee whaling, is this very this depiction of some whalers going out into sea, and they're in like a whaling boat, and there's a harpooner, and they're about to harpoon the whale, and there's a sperm whale. Um, but what we don't see are people of color.
Yes.
And I think history has been colonized in that way, that
Yes.
they're missing people of color, which represented a large part of the whaling industry. And I think that was
Yes.
a really turning point for me, in the writing process, that I wanted to be representative of what actually happens in the Arctic, in this space and time. That even in our historical accounts, we know that there was people of color
Yes.
that stayed at like Jabbertown. You've probably
Yes.
heard of Jabbertown Point Hope, which was a whaling station for the people listening, a whaling station near Point Hope. And we have these
Yes.
stories of, well, there was non-native whalers that stayed there, and they're African, and that included African Americans.
Yes.
So I thought it was important. I thought it was important, but um, I definitely would stress that I put in work. I put in
Yes.
a lot of work in the research, and I hope that's reflected. And um, sitting down and writing from the character's perspective, it really it doesn't flow naturally unless I have
Mhm.
all of the information.
Yes. Well, it comes through for sure in the writing. And actually, I have been to Nantucket, and I've read about New Bedford, and fascinating that you had hiker, you had pious Quaker uh, people who were the investors, in this really risky business, and you'll see mansions uh, from that day that were really built, right? And so that is a fascinating part of history. Now, I noticed you did bring up Atangorak, the chief. Um, and my understanding was, and I don't know a lot, but he was a very powerful leader. In fact, what I had heard was that he more or less sort of required that the whalers live away from the village, and that's why they lived in this place called Jabbertown. I had heard about Jabbertown from my mother, um, and uh, and so that's a fascinating history. So Atangorak was, I guess, trying to kind of keep his people from being, too wrapped up in all that goes on, with that industry, which I think some of it sort of came through in your writing. There was some not so good stuff happening in that era.
Yes, yeah, there's so much that came with the whaling industry, including diseases like smallpox. And Yeah, it was. You had mentioned earlier that Point Hope was a very large community, and I definitely wanted to show that the effects of smallpox, um, that there was this very large Tikek community of 2,000 people, and that before the whaling industry, and that just I it really blew my mind
Mhm.
that
Yes.
because that's modern day Point Hope is 850,
Hmm.
around 850
Hmm.
people. And I was like, that's so much larger. I couldn't imagine the old, like you've probably been to the old town site,
Oh,
and
yes.
um and that whole area just populated with twice as many people as modern day Point Hope.
Yeah.
And yes, that
Yes.
I think it was important for me to show the devastation, the
Yes.
devastation that happened.
Truly.
Yeah.
Truly, there really have been waves of diseases over time. Decimating the populations out in western and northern Alaska. Now, um, now that you've been successful in getting your first one published, I know how exciting that is. It took literally me, I think, 4 years from the time that I signed a deal to get mine published. But I did have the writing pretty much done the first year and a half. And How about your new venture? What are you working on?
Yes, it is quite a long process. And I I signed my contract right before COVID. Yeah, so there was a really long delay from, unfortunately, and I think
Yes.
it was ironic that Sivulliq was about an epidemic, and then
Yes.
that's just epidemic hit. Um, but yeah, I understand the waiting process. It is it's a very slow process I just want to stress it's a lot of work to
Hmm.
get from start to finish. So my next book, it is based in the residential school that my grandfather went to, Chris McNeil Sr. He was full-blooded Nishka,
Hmm.
from King Coleth, British Columbia. And he went to a boarding school, actually it was an industrial school, which that's one of the differences of the residential school system, from America and Canada, is the industrial schools, which the idea was that they wanted indigenous students to be farmers. Uh,
Yes.
and so he went there in Chilliwack, British Columbia. He's from the very northern part of British Columbia, and it's literally if you go to southeast of Alaska
Hmm.
and go to this inlet,
Hmm.
uh, right below the southern part of Southeast Alaska. That's where my grandfather is from. And then when he
I
went
see.
to residential school, he went to the very south, hundreds of miles away,
Hmm.
um, near the US Canadian border,
Hmm.
kind of parallel to Vancouver.
I see.
So my story takes place in 1950. Um, and right now I have the story begins in this empty room, and this man he doesn't know why he's in this room. It's a locked room. And he can remember his childhood, his adulthood, why his ordination as a priest, but he doesn't know why he's in this particular room. And his psychiatrist comes in and says, "Well, you're here because you're on trial. Yeah, you're suspected of pedophilia. You're suspected of homicide, and we're here to evaluate you." And
Oh goodness.
yeah, yes, it is. It begins as a very macabre story.
Now is this you? This is something that came out of your mind, right? I mean, this is not real, right? I mean, this is
Yeah, yes, yes. It's something that came from my imaginations, and yeah.
okay. Okay, fascinating. That's that's a fascinating thing about novels is that you can create anything. And in my case, I was trying to do a memoir, so it's supposed to be sort of like real, and
Yes, yeah.
based on real events, real people, this and that. But so as a novelist, you could create a world, right?
Yes, yes, it's definitely, yeah, there's a lot of freedom there and and storytelling. Yeah.
Mhm.
But the idea came from um I took a class, my bachelor's degree is in justice, and I like criminal justice, and I took a course in corrections in
Mhm.
and American corrections, which it was one of my favorite classes. I was so surprised. The approach that the professor took was um, the American correctional system is really a corporation. It's a profit-making business, and that really surprised
Mhm.
me, especially as somebody that's working in the justice department. And I agree 100%.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the topics in criminal justice and the correctional system is the end of life, and how do they have no system in place for somebody that needs end of life care.
Mhm.
And when it was one of those aha moments that I had sitting listening to them talk about um, this lack of respite care.
Mhm.
I thought, well, what if the perpetrator, what if he's in this situation? Um, yeah, so it's a very it's a very satisfying process. I think that's something that writers really love, is having those moments
Yes.
of euphoria when we're like, yes,
Yeah.
that's going into the book. And we
Yes.
it's like
Well,
writers,
I
we're looking
do.
for that.
Yeah. Well, the thing about writing to me, it's like other art, that's produced, right? It's whether you're a painter or a sculptor or a carver or a movie maker, when you're in that process, you don't really know if what you're doing, or say in this case, what you're writing, is going to resonate for sure, because it's between the reader and you, right? And so I understand that the excitement really of coming up with phrases and sentences and language that really excite you, right? You say,
Yeah.
yeah, this is it, right? So in a way, I don't consider myself a real writer, because real writers need to write, right? They have to write, otherwise they don't exist, right? And so I'm glad that you're finding the excitement, in what you're doing, and I think it will be encouragement, for others to give it a shot, right? Because there are some phenomenal stories out there in Village, Alaska. There's ancient history. There's so much that is unknown, and so I'm glad that you're sort of in the forefront of actually encouraging people to do what you do, that is to take it and run with it.
Yes, absolutely. We need you. There's writers out there that are thinking about writing or saying, I'll do that, I'll do it someday. We need you. Yes, we
Yes.
need more writers.
So do you have a timetable? When can the readers sort of anticipate when your next one might be out?
Yeah, I'm always way too ambitious with my timeline. I always tell myself, well, maybe I'll have a first draft by the end of the year, and that was last year. I'm shooting for the end of next
Yeah,
year
yeah,
of
yeah.
2020. Yeah. So that's
I see.
my next
All
goal.
right. Well, I don't know what your approach is, but when I was starting to write, I was still working, so I couldn't work during normal working hours. So I'd write at night, excuse me, on weekends, on holidays, and on airplanes, right? And sometimes I'd come home from work, be rather ragged, but then I'd sit down at the computer, and by gosh, something would start coming out. I might have 10 pages, and I figured if I could do 10 pages a week, that was sort of my target, right? Just to have 10 pages that I was comfortable with. So do you challenge yourself that way?
I do. I have a very structured process because my mind is always going in a ton of different directions, and so I sit down at the computer. I have one Word document, one working Word document, and I set a numerical goal for myself for the day. I usually shoot for 1,500 words of free writing, or that I'm going to edit a certain number of pages for the day. And it
Mm-hmm.
depends the editing. But I stick to that one document. My goal is to um, fill this document with as many pages as I can. And then there comes a time where I need to go through this document, this working document, and take out what I want to put into the final.
Mm-hmm.
And I call that my harvesting process, where uh, I'm taking these words and building the total amount of word count to my final.
I see.
It's very satisfying for me.
Yeah.
That I like that process because I like seeing the final document, the numbers grow on that.
Right.
And yeah, so in writing a scene, I will start with some keywords that I know I want to be in writing. And for example, I'm introducing my grandpa Chris. It's
Mm-hmm.
loosely based upon my grandpa Chris. And to introduce him, I'm actually telling a story, a historical story of Nishka people, which was a volcano eruption that
Mm-hmm.
happened. Um, the time isn't exact. It's about 1690, 1700, around
Mm-hmm.
there. And uh, it's an eruption that lasted for, they think 60 days, up to
Oh
six
my.
months. And it
Oh my.
killed, I think 2,000 people. So in Chris's introduction, I am saying these are the people that the student, this residential school student, these are his people, and these are the people that birthed this child.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
All right.
it's so I'm starting with in writing this volcano chapter, this volcano eruption scene. I have all the keywords, and then I'll have a list of um, a sequence of events, and then
Mhm.
usually all the verbs that I'm going to use in that. I like to have a good variety of verbs that
Yes.
are going to happen. So we're going to have the eruptions, landslide, messengers. The volcano story is being told from the
Mhm.
perspective of messengers, and then them arriving uh, the eruption site. Um,
I see. Oh,
and then we'll go into this. This is where Chris is from.
all right. Well, this is wonderful, and I'm looking forward to the completion of your book. And I think uh, I think it's wonderful that Alaska Book Week is focusing on your work, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. So, is there anything you would like to say in parting? Since hopefully there will be many, many people kind of honing in on the interview and getting ready for your next book.
Yes, yes. No, I am excited about this new project. It is coming along. It is difficult um simply because residential schools, when we speak about residential schools, w- w- we will be discussing child sexual abuse and child abuse, child neglect. I'm doing a lot of research on the Catholic Church, and also, of course, the surrounding indigenous peoples in in British Columbia. Um, my main characters are indigenous students, Chris and Anita. Anita is a Tlingit student, and yes, there are Tlinkits in British in the very northern part of British Columbia,
Yes.
for Tlingit people, and her introductions. I'm doing almost the same format where I'm introducing her people as introducing her, and Anita's introduction will be a story about Fort Selkirk and the Chilkat people. I'm sure you're familiar with the people of Cluckwan and Haynes. I want her to be
Yes.
from
Yes.
that area. That's where my grandmother is from. My grandmother's from Cluckwan. Um,
Yes.
and
All right. Well, during the gold rush, right?
yeah,
Anyway, yeah. So this is fascinating, and uh, in uh, conclusion, I would say that it's exciting, and it's a story that probably most of us Alaskans will have never come across, and we'll all be looking forward to the completion of the book.
great.
Koyan.
Yes. Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you. Gonna